All right, and I know some other folks will kind of join as we get going here, but thanks for making the time to be with us today in the middle of the workday all across the network, various time zones. So we're grateful for your time. If I can ask you just through the duration, of course, to please make sure that your microphones are muted, and we are recording this session, which we will share out widely among the JSN for those folks that can't make it today. On behalf of the Jesuit School Network's conference office, welcome to our latest virtual Ignatian inquiry session. The JSN seeks to be a supportive resource to our member schools, and this virtual session is designed to be just that, a carved out space to listen, to learn, and to engage with one another. We're eager to encourage a spirit of inquiry across the many layers of our work in Jesuit education, and we envision our particular brand of Ignatian inquiry to be the art of inquiry as seen through our Ignatian lens, asking questions and exploring issues that matter in our schools through the frame of our shared Jesuit mission. For those of you that I do not know, I'm Kristen Ross-Cully, and I serve as Director of Inquiry and New Ventures with the JSN. And I'd like to thank my colleague, Kristen Smith, who leads all things communication for the JSN, who's here on the call and will help us enjoy a smooth Zoom this afternoon. If we might begin and just take a moment to start as we do with an opening prayer. If we can quiet ourselves and be reminded that in being together this afternoon that we are in the presence of God. In the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Teach me to listen, O God, to those nearest me, my family, my friends, my coworkers. Help me to be aware that no matter what words I hear, the message is, accept the person I am. Listen to me. Teach me to listen, my caring God, to those far from me, the whisper of the hopeless, the plea of the forgotten, the cry of the anguished. Teach me to listen, O God, my mother, to myself. Help me to be unafraid to trust the voice inside in the deepest part of me. Teach me to listen, Holy Spirit, for your voice in busyness and in boredom, in certainty and in doubt, in noise and in silence. Teach me, Lord, to listen. Saint Ignatius, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son. Amen. So again, I welcome you to our latest virtual Ignatian inquiry session, which we have titled The Principal's Experience, exploring doctoral research that seeks to understand the experiences and perceptions of novice principals leading traditional Jesuit secondary schools. The role of the principal is one of the most unique and complex in our schools, connected to nearly every facet of our communities. Yet the experience of being a principal is not often understood until a leader sits in the position. This session will explore the doctoral research undertaken by Dr. Michael Wood, principal of Jesuit High School in Sacramento, California, who sought to explore the experience of new principals at traditional Jesuit secondary schools. In sharing his research this afternoon across the JSN, Dr. Wood will highlight the value of preparation for this key leadership position, of support, of role clarification, and the president-principal model. We know this session will be of interest to many of those in leadership and faculty and staff positions across the provinces who support the mission of Jesuit education and seek to gain greater insight into this crucial leadership role in our schools. From teachers to board members, we hope that the learning shared will illuminate the many hats that a principal wears each day. It's my pleasure to introduce our leader this afternoon. Dr. Michael Wood has worked in Jesuit secondary education for over 20 years. He began his career in Jesuit education at Loyola High School in Los Angeles in 2003, where he spent 12 years as a theology teacher and dean of students. In 2015, he accepted a position as principal at Jesuit High School in Sacramento, where he graduated from the class of 1999. After graduating from Jesuit High School, Michael attended Loyola Marymount University to study theology, earning a bachelor's degree in 2003 and a master's degree in 2008. After moving into school leadership at Loyola High School, Michael began his doctoral work at Creighton University, where he earned an interdisciplinary doctorate in leadership in 2019. We're looking forward to hearing the fruits of that scholarship this afternoon. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Wood.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks, folks, for being here. See some familiar faces. Father Ed Harris is a legend to me and many others in Jesuit Secondary Ed. So thank you all for gathering on what I think for most of you is a mid to late afternoon. It's just turned noon here in California. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Are we sharing, everybody? All right, good. So yeah, good to be with you. It'll be only the second time I've shared my doctoral research. Right after I finished the program, the pandemic hit, and so it kind of disrupted some of the flow there. So it's nice to get back into it. Just a quick kind of spoiler alert, my doctoral research did not in any way solve the challenges of being a principal. I have not discovered the magic wand of how to do it correctly, and I'm not by myself the perfect principal because of it. But hopefully some of the things that I found, while not necessarily life-changing or leadership-changing, can resonate with folks. And so some of the goals that I think we have here today is, one, just to share the findings. What did other novice principals perceive and experience in their role as novice principals? How can we learn from that experience? What are some of the proposed solutions to the challenges that this position faces? I added some things that aren't part of the dissertation because this is my 9th year as principal, and I thought, in light of what the dissertation and the novice principal experience was, what are things we have learned since then, maybe with a longer view, so that's sprinkled in a bit. Then, of course, to invite some discussion and reflection when we have time at the end. Just a note, like most things, take what works and leave behind what doesn't. A dissertation by its nature is rather specific. It's very narrow in the topic. So this isn't about principles in any type of school or any type of high school or any type of Catholic school. It's specifically focused on traditional Jesuit secondary schools, but it doesn't mean it can't apply and certain things can't be taken in other contexts. So feel free to appropriate, accept, and utilize these findings in whatever your particular context or school culture is. Like I said, take what is helpful and leave behind what is not. Hopefully we do that most of the time. So just a few things about my dissertation. This is the title. You also have to have a colon in your title somewhere. So it's Novice Principles at Traditional Jesuit Secondary Schools, Advancing the Standards and Benchmarks for Jesuit Education. So a couple just notes. Novice principals in the scholarship are principals in years 1 through 5. That's just how the scholarship defines them. My experience wasn't, like I said, focused to we don't have a great name for this yet. The traditional schools, sometimes they're called the established schools. They're just to distinguish between Cristo Rey schools, nativity schools. I don't think the assistancy has come up with the perfect word to describe what sometimes are described as traditional schools. So for the purposes of this dissertation, that's what we used. But the other thing here is the standards and benchmarks. And I think everyone or most folks in our work know this document, the Our Way of Proceeding document, that if we're going to talk about leadership and successful leadership or challenges to leadership, a study like this has to have some metric for what that ought to look like or what successful leadership is. And really the best way for Jesuit secondary education is to use the document that says, here are the standards and benchmarks which define, and we sort of measure ourselves of how well we're doing in advancing the charism and the mission of a Jesuit school. So a discussion of leadership couldn't really take place outside of some metric, and I thought that was the best document or the best place to start. Every dissertation has a purpose, and so I'll read this and I'll go through this pretty quickly, but the purpose of, oh, sorry, one more note. This was a qualitative study, and I had 8 participants that represented each of the provinces in the Jesuit Schools Network. But the purpose of that qualitative study was to explore and understand the experiences and perceptions of novice principals leading in a traditional Jesuit secondary school within the 4 Jesuit provinces in the United States. So again, explore and understand is really the purpose of this. So what I'm going to do now is just talk about some, not all, but some of the findings and give some reflection on what those findings might mean. So to start the background, the role, complexity, and challenges of a principal don't only exist within Jesuit secondary schools, of course. So the first part of the scholarship is, what are the challenges of principals in any type of secondary school, public or private? And what we see in that research is high levels of stress, burnout, anxiety and low job satisfaction, role complexity and inconsistent expectations. We'll talk about that more. And then overall, there are principal shortages. There is a high turnover in these positions and no apprenticeship positions necessarily in this role. And what that means is, well, some positions we can model, we can shadow and see a bulk of that work from kind of an associate director position or an understudy. The scholarship on the role of principal is there really isn't a particular position that gets someone into that with a broad experience of the principal's job until they sit in there. Again, that is for the larger picture of public and private education. The other thing about role complexity, and there's a little quote from my dissertation on the right there, I won't read the whole thing, but it says, the principal's role is broad and ill-defined, focuses on facilities management, student health and safety, innovative curriculum expertise, responsive parent appeasement, enrollment management, financial planning. Those are lots of different things that require different types of attention and expertise, but somehow the principal's job, that person is responsible for that, and that you can even broaden that range to more things as well. Now, that's just for principals in any context. That is the general experience of challenges that novice principals face when taking it. So we take that and let's apply that to Jesuit secondary principals. And my slides get less messy as we go, so I apologize. But you take that role complexity and add it to the role of a Jesuit secondary school principal. And I'll just read this, and it's my last slide that I'll read. I wrote in the dissertation, for principals in Jesuit Catholic school settings, the challenges mentioned above intersect with preserving and advancing the mission of a Jesuit education while learning to navigate the realities of serving an organizational structure where president, principal, board of directors, and Jesuit religious communities all reside within the school's organizational structure. So all of the challenges that exist within the role of being a principal, take that and add leading as an officer in our corporate model of a Jesuit secondary school that has this governance situation that you probably had no access to or minimal experience with when you or before you began that role. So the complexity of this role not only is being the principal itself, but how it fits in the larger organizational structure causes additional challenges within the novice principal experience. So, one of the things that I think that this is helpful as a way of understanding the role, and I don't know if folks have been in sales or a family or friends are in sales. I'm not a sales expert. But one of the things that in the scholarship on the principal's role, that they compare it to other types of jobs. And so say a salesperson, so say you begin as a sales associate and you start getting good or learning how to sell a particular product. And then you get good enough and you have a desire to be a manager of other sales associates, and you use your experience as a sales associate to better manage the newest sales associates, become a manager. But you're all within the same context of that particular industry or that work or that product. And you get good at being a manager and become a regional director. You're directing people that you just did what they did, right? You were a sales manager, now you're leading other sales managers, all within that same particular hopeful outcome of selling more of that product. And that kind of linear role of how to be better at one's job than to supervise or manage and lead in that job tends to be the experience of some types of positions. It is not the same thing for a principal, because those folks who become a principal don't have such a linear approach to the position. So some people were a fantastic dean of students. And they learned about how to run a school day and student discipline and parent engagement. Some were a great AP for academics, and they were a really good curriculum leader, but they didn't have a lot of experience with student discipline. Some were great program directors, and that's where they cut their teeth. And they figured out, I know how to run a program in my school, but that program was not the whole school. So success in the positions that led to being a principal did not necessarily mean you knew the whole role of principal or had experiences that that particular role will require once you get there. And so that is the general concept of novice principals moving into these roles, how their approach to it can cause some challenges and also and opportunities for when they take the role. So I'll talk now about some of the basic findings that the participants in my study helped to unpack. And I will move the slide over this time. So I don't want this to scare everybody if you want to be a principal someday or thinking about it. This isn't the end of the story, but here's how novice principals tended to feel when they took on their roles. The first thing is isolated and exposed in decision-making. So if you look at the organizational chart of your schools, hopefully your schools have an org chart somewhere that you've published recently. One of the things you'll see at the faculty level, you'll see teachers or department chairs, and they have peers with each other, right? There's multiple department chairs, multiple members of the faculty. Even your program directors have other program directors who they work with. Your assistant principals have other assistant principals they work with. Then you to the principal's job. That person, he or she, is all by him or herself on the org chart. There are no peers in the school. The only other person that kind of looks like that is the president, who might have a similar loneliness as what they talk about, feeling kind of, I'm the only one who is making these decisions, responsible for these decisions, and I have no one to go to. I have no other person in my organizational structure that's a peer of mine. And that became a challenge for the novice principal. And we'll talk more about the org structure later. Constantly on the job. And the positions they held prior, there were ebbs and flows. There were times when things were heavy and times when things were light. Some of them didn't have a lot of weekend activities or evening activities. They got to this position and went, I'm never not working. I'm always responsible for something, whether it's just an evening text message or a weekend phone call. It never stopped. And that was a challenging reality for them. An interesting one I thought was pressure and leading in a complex political environment. So what they weren't prepared for and felt really stressed out by was when people used or organizations used their schools kind of as the culture war center. If my school is doing X or Y, it's incongruent with my political or religious outlook, and therefore the school is to blame, and it causes controversy and crisis and scandal. Now, a lot of schools go through that at various times. They fire a teacher, there's a major student issue, it's public, all sorts of things can cause that type of a scandal. We're not going to solve that problem, that will always happen. The novice principal said, didn't know how to deal with that, and gosh, that was really difficult and anxiety provoking for me. Another note, and I won't go into all of them in much detail, is things they didn't feel prepared for. Crisis response, they go, the first crisis was a problem. We didn't know what we were supposed to do. What was my role? What was their role? Crisis response was unprepared for. The emotional toll, they go, gosh, and I quoted one of the participants who said, some of the hard days are really hard. And that's true for this role. And then the lack of student connection, that's not surprising for folks, that you just don't see students in the same way or as often. And the thing that brought them into this work was probably working with students. And so the thing they're doing less now is working with students and how that impacted their experience. Other findings, what I thought were interesting to share here is most of the principals, all of the ones that I worked with, had an early connection to Jesuit education. They didn't all go to Jesuit schools, but they knew about us. They had a sibling that went, a parent that went, that somehow it was part of their experience early on. Just not a bad or a good thing, just noting it. A mentor who encouraged leadership. Every single principal that I interviewed and was part of the study said they had no intention of becoming a principal or even a school leader until someone said, hey, you might be good at this. And I think if we're sitting in leadership roles right now, that's probably true for us. It was certainly true for me, that someone had to pull it out of us. That means if you're in a leadership role right now, don't assume that the folks that you're working with are preparing to be the next department chair, program director, AP, or principal. It might take someone like you to say, hey, I think you do a good job. Don't assume that that's already in their mindset. So we have to kind of craft and cultivate the next group of leaders. And that means just telling them sometimes. And then most of them, are all of them in this case, worked in a Jesuit school before becoming a principal. Again, not good or bad, just noting that's the case. I don't think it's a problem to have someone from outside of the Jesuit network become a principal or leader in a Jesuit school by any means, just knowing that some of the context there and the learning curve would be a little bit different. But that is not a qualified comment. It's just what most of the principals had the experience before they became a principal. Moving on with the findings here, how did they lead? So a lot of their answers, I'll put some of my memories of the interviews, were kind of how they hoped to lead or they wanted to lead. It didn't always manifest the way they wanted it to, but their approach to leadership was as follows: trust building and relationship building. I think if you're interested in leadership theory, a neat one to study is authentic leadership theory. I think it has some real benefits on practical leadership and trust building and consistency of presence and communication style throughout your organization. So feel free to look up some articles on authentic leadership theory. It might be an interesting hole to get into. Modeling and being present. I think modeling was important. One of the books I read for this study had a chapter called Be the Filter. And it was a book on what successful principals do. And be the filter meant that when you're in the principal's role or any leadership role, the way you respond and experience things and your public demeanor is incredibly important for the folks that you lead. So if you get frustrated, you have a temper tantrum, easily discouraged, whatever the case may be, all you've just said to everyone else is it's okay to be frustrated, easily discouraged, and throw a temper tantrum. So when the principal does it, it's a lot different than when you can do it with your peers and maybe a friend or a colleague at the teacher level, or even the APs can do that. When the principal does it, regardless of his or her relationship and connection with the folks they're with, if you are doing it, you're giving permission for everyone else to do it. And I like that the participants noted that. Again, I've made that mistake 1,000 times of being a bad filter for folks. If you're being sarcastic, then your folks are going to be sarcastic. This is true in the classroom. It's true when we're coaching. It's true in lots of ways, but it's a good thing to be self-aware of. Everything I do is being watched, observed, and modeled by folks. I think that's all I'll say there, except for one note. Again, I'll note wasn't in the dissertation. I could write a large book on all the mistakes that I've made in my work, and one of them has to do with modeling. I like when I was a dean of students or a theology teacher, I like to think out loud. I still do. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this or do that? And wouldn't this be a neat idea? Why doesn't the school do X, Y, and Z? And that can be a fun, healthy, creative, collaborative way to work. But if you're in a leadership role and you're making decisions on people's livelihoods, and you're just feeling free to talk about those things, and they might be nodding and saying, yeah, great idea. You might be terrifying the people that you're talking to who think, is he going to make that change tomorrow? Is there a process he's gone through to think about that? Has he consulted with me or my team about that? Or is he just, what's going on there? It's a good example of the difference between how you interact with folks in a leadership role like the principal than you can in other leadership roles. That being thoughtful about your interactions with folks, even if you have good intention, it can still be kind of a challenge. So that thought was a good point about being a filter. Oh, and I always like novice principals, again, this is from years after, we always try and feel like we can solve all of the problems, and we have to because that's our job because we're the principal, that we need to be the smartest person in the room. And we make a lot of mistakes early on with that. Why would I know anything about good budget process when I've never done it formally? I have no training in that, but I'm in the room thinking the best way to budget ought to be this. We feel some pressure to have to know these things when there's no reason that we ought to. And a more veteran, or when you have that experience, or you were smarter than I was, or other folks, don't try and be the smartest person in the room. And you'll find that better things happen because of that. All right, moving on. And I think this is a slide that I think folks are going to want to spend some time with maybe after this. This is about the standards and benchmarks, how we led in light of the standards and benchmarks. And so what I want to note, first of all, is when we talked to participants in this study, there was incredible consistency with how they felt their proximity to leading in the areas of mission and identity, spiritual and faith formation, and a faith that does justice. Incredibly consistent. Of course, I need to focus on that, attend to that, be present for that, prioritize that, talk about that in my newsletters, whatever it was. There was no suggestion otherwise. Contrast that with the inconsistency of their proximity to the academic excellence of the school. That some would say, I got an AP for that. She's great. She runs the curriculum stuff. That's not my job. And then some would say, I'm a curriculum leader. Principals ought to be curriculum leaders. That's what we're supposed to do. We should be spending most of our time in the classrooms, working with departments and the academic board on alignment and assessment and all of those things. Well, what's important to note about that inconsistency is not that there's a right or wrong answer to that, is if the principals of different schools in the province had a wild inconsistency there, what does it mean for the folks that we lead? How many of them think my principal ought to be a curriculum leader, and I have not seen that principal in the classroom or stepping up at academic board meetings, when the principal is saying, I was never going to do that anyway? So those challenges come up with, I'm winning at the things I think I'm doing well at, but I'm not doing the things they think I should be doing well at. And so your leadership success or your experience might be challenged by the fact that you have inconsistent role expectations. For our purposes, especially in Jesuit secondary schools, and I do talk to public school principal counterparts all the time, they would have a different maybe description of the principal's role when it comes to academic leadership. I don't know the answer to what it should be in Jesuit secondary schools, but I know it's inconsistent, and that's something that principals should think about in terms of their orientation to this part of the work. I'll speak for myself. I'm one of the ones that says I have a wonderful assistant principal and team and department chair group who do so much of this heavy lift that my job is to get out of the way and just ask good questions when I need to. Then my gifts are spent elsewhere. That's just how I tended to do it. After 9 years, my faculty and staff tend to understand that more probably than when I first got here. The next thing would be the governance part of our standards and benchmarks. And for the principal, it really focuses on the principal and president relationship in that model. For those of us who've been in this work for a long time, we may have heard, and I see Father Harris here, who was a principal and a president and many other things, every other position in a school. It used to be the president needs to stay out of the principal's way, and the principal needs to stay out of the president's way. Stay in your lane, find your boundaries, and don't interfere with each other. That was an old mantra that sometimes permeated that particular relationship. And I would say that's difficult because I think we need not to look at it that way. And one of the participants said something I thought was beautiful, and I think helped me understand this even better. He says the principal and president should stand back to back. And what he meant was this: the president is oftentimes facing outward to the alumni community, the parent community, especially the alumni parent community, donors, the larger region that they're in, and that's who they're talking to. And the principal's talking inward to the current parents and the current faculty and the current students. But the reason they're back to back is because they need to hear what each other are saying. They need to hear what each other are saying. So it's congruent between what we're expressing to the world externally, what we're saying internally. And the second part, they need to lean on each other. They need to stand back to back, that they need each other more. So we'll talk more about this in kind of the solutions part, but reflecting and thinking about what your relationship with the president should really be an important part of the onboarding of a principal. There's no right or wrong, but it needs attention at the very least. And then this is a real simple one. Principals realize they need to delegate a lot. As we talked about before, the span of control is so broad. You know, I think about just what happens in a particular day. I'm working with the business office on reimagining how we do a particular scholarship from a donor. And I have a soccer game I'm the administrator in charge for this afternoon. And I think I have a meeting on with the wellness program on some challenging issues with students and identity, all in a single day, right? So that's just Tuesday. Tomorrow has another set of those types of conversations to be a part of. So you have to delegate to let other people be the primary warriors and champions of that work. The challenge is, one thing I would say is, the principal's role isn't to be the expert, but to see how that all works together. To see how, if I'm working with the director of campus ministry and he or she is so excited about the latest Kairos for junior overnight retreat they just had, how am I able to take that energy and say, how can my coaching staff tap into that? When the student returns from their Kairos, they have some consistency with, say, the coach that they just went back into practice with. If the principal can see the connective tissue between those wide range of things, that might be a role that is just as helpful as knowing everything about each of those roles. So delegation was an important part of the novice principal experience. Moving on. Oh, I didn't do that. That's the slide I missed, sorry. And we'll go to this slide. Here are the proposed solutions. And again, we have not solved it, but things that we thought about. The first thing is, given the loneliness or the isolation that novice principals feel and their lack of peer within the org chart, one of the ideas was, should the school, the president, perhaps the board, just make sure that there's some independent leadership coach, therapist, spiritual, just someone that person has a safe place to go. Because the first person might be the president, that's the person's boss in most cases. The next people are their assistant principals, they manage and supervise those folks. So some independent person might be structurally part of the role. Not, it'd be nice if, but that the school structured that. I would say for a lot of these things, I would put the president as well, that he or she might need some of the same levels of support. Develop an acting principal, and I've been terrible about this, by the way, but when I go on vacation with my family, it really should be the case where we have delegated authority to another leader in the school to make decisions as the principal when the principal is gone. Otherwise, you're not really on vacation. You're not really taking a break from the institution. It might be that the person has the authority to wait till you get back, and that's fine. But can you actually institutionalize who's in charge at certain times of the year? The second piece, or the third piece here, had to do with being on the job entirely too much. So establishing healthy communication protocols. One of the things that my team does, and there's no, again, right or wrong way to do this, is there are emergencies and we need to be available a lot. That does happen. That's a text message or a phone call to my cell phone, right? That's when that needs to happen with the admin team or the director of security or the president or someone. But if it can wait for tomorrow, you can email that. Email can wait for tomorrow. Text messages need attention right now. One of the things that we've worked on in our team is saying, if you need me now, give me a text message. If you're just my dean is, I have an incredibly amazing dean of students. He is a night owl. He likes to work at night. I'm a morning guy. I do all my work in the morning. So if he's texting me at 10:30 at night because he's trying to work through his email inbox and has some ideas, he has to realize, and does realize, that's putting some energy on me at 10:30 at night when I'm ready to wind down. So we've learned how to develop communication protocols that hopefully protect a little bit better of a work-life balance. Let the things that are urgent be urgent. Let things that can wait till tomorrow, wait till tomorrow. And this was, I don't know about what I wrote here in my dissertation, but somehow I said, create an expectation for the president to attend to the cura personalis of the principal. So right into the president's job description, a successful president is one who makes sure that there's a sustainable position taking place with his or her principal. That's actually one of the roles, because the principals, we won't always do it ourselves. Who is the one who's worrying about us, making sure all of these things happen? So You can take that or leave that. Other solutions was formal onboarding. Some, I don't know how schools do it. Some are probably better than others, but are we doing some really good intentional onboarding for the principal? So role clarification with president, again, whatever that needs to be, there's no one size fits all, but let's have that conversation. Some relationship building. Quick story about, we have a new president at Jesuit High School right now. Chris Alling is fantastic. For the first semester, we didn't talk about business as a leadership team. We had to do it every once in a while. We did a book study. We did a book study on the gifts of imperfection, and that brought our team together. And so any problem that was solved after this was solved with a team that had worked together through some important experience of a shared read, that he built relationships first. And I thought that was an important piece. There should be some good work in crisis management preparation. So before the crisis happens, and it will, is that new president or is that new principal prepared for how this institution tries to deal with those things? Don't wait for the first crisis to happen. And then some good work about this. Remember the idea of academics. Am I an academic leader? Am I more mission leader? What is the role of the principal? Let's work, when we work on those opening faculty staff meetings and communications, let's make sure that we say, my goals for the next year or 2 years are to focus on X, Y, and Z. I'm here to hopefully accomplish and work for you on this, which is not this and this and this. You might not agree with where that particular energy is going to go, but at least you know what I've been charged to do and I've been tasked to do, and make that articulation clear. So if they say, he's not in my classroom enough, or she's not in my classroom enough, and they say, you're right, that wasn't that person's focus in this particular setting. So make sure there's some continuity between those expectations. All right, and I'll wrap up here with some final thoughts. One, big mistakes that young principals make, and we make lots of them, is making decisions that don't have a vehicle. So a lot of new principals learn about a new idea. They want to change the dress code because they want a better dress code. They want to change the cell phone policy when students can or can't have cell phones. And there's good reasons independently for those decisions to be considered. But what you find is buy-in is more difficult to get if you don't have a school-wide vehicle for that decision. So here's the example of the dress code. I just want a fancier dress code, a nicer dress code, one that's better looking. That's probably not good enough to get the students, the faculty, and the parents to buy in. But if there's a vehicle in our, say, educational improvement plan through our accreditation visit, that we want to make sure that we have a safer campus. And so dress code actually allows us to identify who should and shouldn't be on campus more easily, along with it hiring another director of campus safety and some fencing and some policies around communication or doors being locked or rekeying the school. All of a sudden, your dress code conversation now fits into this larger endeavor for the school and has a vehicle for which it can then live. Good ideas that don't have a vehicle become a school where I said here, becomes a patchwork of solved problems. And that way we've solved problems, but with no consistent direction for the school. There's lots of vehicles that we can use. And I wrote some, the grad can be a vehicle. The UAPs can be a vehicle. I think that's misspelling right there on that one. If you have a long-term plan for your school. Other vehicles might be a little bit more philosophical, the gospel, the spiritual exercises. Just make sure we're grounding what we're doing in some shared direction of the school. A lot of my best ideas needed to wait because it was just an idea that sat out there in the middle of nowhere. So if that makes sense, we can talk about it later, but I found that to be a very helpful instrument. Stop trying to write the perfect email. So Mr. Alling and I talk a lot about this, my president, and I talk about the perfect email. I don't know how many folks have helped with their school's student orientation at the beginning of the year. And usually you get August and September, or the school's going pretty well, there's a little honeymoon period, and then reality sets in October and students start making bad decisions, they get comfortable. And we sometimes go, gosh, if we just did a better job upstream and crafted that handbook section a little bit better, or told the parents in an email it was a little bit more specific, or changed the order of speakers at orientation, we could have solved that problem that's going to manifest in October. And every year we go and refine and try and write the perfect memo, create the perfect handbook, and create the perfect orientation. But inevitably, we're always disappointed because in October, some knucklehead always does something that is unhelpful and causes us to go, gosh. When you do this long enough, you begin to realize there is no such thing as the perfect email, and I'm sure you write great ones. There's no such thing as the perfect handbook, and I'm sure your handbooks are dialed in. But if you're leaning on those to solve problems downstream, it's going to be frustrating. And so what we talk about is we ultimately are managing human organizations. They're human, and humans by our nature, all of us on this Zoom, all of the people in our school, we are messy. We're beautifully and amazingly messy, and messiness is going to happen. So instead of focusing on being the best bureaucrat that you can be to solve the inevitable messiness, how are we in good relationship that we can resolve these issues when that messiness inevitably occurs? And so the focus on relationship and whatever that looks like, again, I was the bureaucrat early on in my year, and I still am good at that. I was a dean, so I like bureaucracy, I like efficiency, I like fairness, I like consistency. But none of those actually solved problems than when I was in good relationship with the parent community and we had developed some trust and understanding, or the faculty that we were on the same team working together. Every problem was just easier to solve. The better bureaucrat I was, the problems didn't go away. They just changed what they looked like. So stop trying to write the perfect email. The last thing I'll say, and this is just you can take or leave it. Maybe your schools are doing it. I love the practice of the spiritual conversation. The Jesuit Schools Network has done a great job in promoting this form of intentional dialogue and listening and group discernment. If you can, if you've done it, keep doing it. If you did it once and it was okay, keep doing it. Our community has used these in a variety of formats now, and the more you use them, the better instrument it is. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up spiritual conversation. And what it does is allows people to speak, but more importantly, it allows people to listen more intently. So within that messy humanity, if we can learn from each other and let that spirit move with us and through us together, we tend to get a better outcome. That is not part of the dissertation. I just thought I'd put it in there because it's worked well lately. So with that, those are my thoughts, and I'll give it back over to Kristen to keep us moving forward. Thank you for your attention and your patience today.
Thank you so much, Michael. One of the things as I listen to you, I love the idea of research and scholarly work feeling very grounded in like real life in the everyday. And I think just listening to you, you just really do an outstanding job describing or giving a Windows view look maybe into what's a really complex, big job. I like the way you said, the language you used, that the span of control of the principalship is so broad. So meaning the charges of the principal just runs the gamut. And it probably is the one role in our Jesuit schools that intersects with almost every other role in the building, which means that there's lots of folks who have a view, maybe it's a narrow view of that principal job. But when you sit in that seat, you get the whole expanse. So I like the way you say that the span of control is so broad, and much of what you shared resonated with my own personal experience. I'm curious, and I'll kick off the kind of Q&A portion here. We have some time to pick Mike's brain even further with folks who are joining us. So I'll get that started. I'm curious, you started this research with your own experience and knowing the role. What was the biggest surprise to you? Like what were you not expecting to learn from the folks that were participants in your study?
Yeah, thanks. So the biggest surprise, I think, was and the most helpful piece, I think, was the inconsistent relationship with the elements of the benchmarks. Because I think that we learned that there wasn't a one size fits all, there wasn't a shared expectation, and that being good at this didn't mean that there was this template for how to do this thing perfectly or the right way. but there was a discovery that had to take place. And what is my context and my school and my skill set and my background? How do I let that be part of the story as opposed to checking boxes on a template? I thought, I didn't say that perfectly, but that was a surprise. Is it isn't a one size fits all. Or maybe it wasn't a surprise, but an important realization. And then I think the thing that also surprised me, or I think maybe was affirming, was that even though the principals I had worked under over the years seemed to have a nice kind of mellow, consistent tenor to them, they also had these emotional and difficult and stressful and anxiety-provoking challenges. They were good filters sometimes. They did a good job of managing that, but I wasn't alone, or we weren't alone in having those challenges. The veteran ones did a good job of protecting us from that particular piece.
And I think the way you say that, it is definitely not a one size fits all role. Like I think about Mike and I both, we both every fall gather with all of the principals across the network, and we have an annual meeting that's, I think, a really positive experience of being together with like-minded people. But I always look out on that crowd and I think the diversity of the backgrounds of the people who are serving as principals across the JSN, it's remarkable. You know, there are teachers and counselors and people with mission background and all over, you know, you name it, you name it. There are a lot of different paths to this one position. So that your research or your experience shares that you get to bring that kind of authentic side of who you are to work and to the role to navigate all the complexities. I mean, that is affirming, as you say. So thank you for that.
Yeah, when you go to a dean's conference, all the deans will say, principals should have had some experience in the dean's job. They can't be a good principal unless they were a dean. Then you go to the AP for Academics conference, and they say the exact same thing. They all feel like I'm the school, and everything goes through us. And
yeah,
and then you get to the principals meeting, and you go, yeah, no, we're all here.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing fully prepares.
No.
So we have some time, and I'd like to, if you're in a spot where you're able to turn on your cameras just to have a little bit of a conversation here, that would be great. Makes it more interesting. But just hop in. So what's your feedback or your questions, reactions for Mike while we have some time left?
And disagree with me by any means, by the way. My staff does it all day long, so I'm not afraid of being disagreed with.
Mike, I appreciate what you had to say. I was curious, what do you see as like next steps if somebody was going to follow up on your research or you know, push it to the next level?
Do you mean for someone to do more research or someone who's considering a leadership role in their schools?
Picking more on the research end. I'm getting close to having to start the dissertation process, and so I was like, oh, I'm kind of curious where he's going to take this and what he might have as suggestions.
Yeah, it's actually in my dissertation. One of the sections you have to do is ideas for further research. I don't remember what they are at this point. Actually, I have to go back and look. So it's on the end of my dissertation. But I think one of the things that might be interesting to look further into, I would focus on faculty. I think the engines of our mission are teachers or whoever spends the most time with students. And you learn how important they are. Like you can write, again, the perfect email, the perfect memo, the perfect speech. It doesn't matter if the student doesn't walk into a classroom where he or she feels safe, comfortable, challenged, held accountable, all of those important things. How are we making sure that the people who are with our students all day are really the engine that drives the mission? And what type of research can we do to ensure that we have mission-driven, mission-centric humans that are interacting with these students all day long? What might that look like? Or how do we form new ones to make sure that those interactions are such that they that they do a good job? Because again, if you have bad people in the classroom, we're not bad, the wrong people or indifferent people. No matter what work we do on our end, it's going to fall flat with their formation. The second one would be a theme we've used at Jesuit recently, which has been helpful, was as tuition goes up, right, as we're college prep institutions, and as kind of this Catholic subculture has tended not to permeate the reasons that people come to our schools. that oftentimes we engage in a more transactional environment with folks, that I'm paying $18,000, $25,000. I want these classes, these grades, this college placement, this much playing time. And we're being good relationship if you're doing your end of the bargain by giving me all of those things. But we're going, no, those are just vehicles, instruments of your formation. Even not getting the AP class or the playing time is part of that good formation, the transformational part. So how do we work on getting our families who enter into a transactional relationship to discover the transformational goal of our work through their experience and time? So maybe that's a parent-facing or community-facing study or thing that folks can do. If you solve those problems, please share it with all of us. That'd be great. So Woody Lou is on this call. I was his dean. Made a lot of mistakes there.
There's the story, right? We have a couple more moments, so who else would like to pitch in here?
Mike, I really appreciated your findings and everything you shared. Even in a pre-secondary setting, so much of this is relative. One of the things that I just wanted to add, one, I love that you did a Brene Brown book club with your president. That's a great idea. But I can't emphasize enough the whole idea of a leadership coach or a spiritual director for that position, because like I know in reopening a school post-pandemic, that was necessary for me. And then not really looking into getting a spiritual director until I was out of the work. So it's important. The other thing I was going to add that I think is important is really knowing those in the building, especially if you're coming from a non-Jesuit school, those that have that institutional knowledge that you can lean on, because that group of people can really help you not sink the ship. And that was really beneficial to me. But I loved all of this. It's great as I get back into the work and good reminders. So thank you.
Welcome back into it, Lorraine. Yeah, the Jesuit Schools Network, the province, has been just a gift for me, and I think for many others, because that's our peer group. That's really where, not in our schools, we don't have that peer there, but we have that similar experience. That's right. And you're right, we could all use help and coaching and an independent, safe person to go to. So that's good. I see a question in the chat here, Chris. Do you want me to go to that one? Just a softball here from Nick. He says, how do you recommend new principals engage in the reality of culture wars in the church and world, specifically in helping faculty with different politics work together towards a common goal? In addition, how do you engage folks who aren't interested in pro-climate, anti-racism, anti-homophobic, et cetera, in that necessary justice work? Yeah, that's an easy question there, Nick. Don't know. We're working through it. I'll answer that question in a little bit of a different way, and kind of a story that I'm working through right now. We have we're all boys school here in Sacramento, and we have 2 full-time wellness folks, a licensed therapist, a LMFT, and then an LMFT trainee who works under her on her license, and they're fantastic. And you can imagine that a lot of the students that come with issues they're not talking to their mom and dad about, they're not talking to their teachers about, and a lot of it has to do with their identity, their gender, their sexuality. And what is the orientation of a therapist who has a discipline of being a therapist, which the rules that govern that, while being in a Catholic school where we're the secondary educators of the primary educators, mom and dad, and what boundaries do we have to work through caring for a student and how caring for that student might feel like it's incongruent with maybe what the church is teaching or what some people within the church want to emphasize versus other folks want to emphasize. And it's tricky. And what they wanted from me at first was, Mike, I want a policy that I feel protected with. Like, I can't give you a policy. I can't write something for you that solves incredibly complex, individualized issues. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can live in a space with you where we can be in constant dialogue. So the theology department chair, the director of service and justice, the 2 wellness counselors, the counselor, myself, another AP, and the president, every 2 weeks meet and just talk about things that are emerging in their world. And we live in that gray space. Because if you make me write a policy down, if you make me do that, you're not going to like it, and I'm not going to like it. because it doesn't give me the freedom to navigate within the complex scope of the church and the world and politics when I want freedom. So if I say, you know, what if a student is transgender? What does that mean for us? I don't know. I want to know what that particular student, what year is that student? What do they need from me? Where are their parents at? What do they want? I want freedom to be able to do really good work with that student. If you pigeonhole me into a policy, I don't think we're going to like what we're going to get. So part of it was something helpful. Can we just live in the gray and be okay with that space being one that we can work in? And that helped them a lot. In terms of the larger picture pieces, I think scaffolding is an important thing. In COVID, if you recall, post George Floyd, you may have seen messages from the Jesuit Schools Network, your provincial and your province, and they were some bold messages. They were strong, and it was like, wow. And you almost felt kind of, I love that I'm part of this network that's willing to say these things. Then I shared that with my people, and I just got destroyed. I mean, years of how dare you and your culture wars, and you're a racist, you're an anti-racist, or a racist against white people. I got it called every name in the book. I'm against the Catholic Church, you know. And what I learned was my students who were freshmen weren't ready for some of the things that we were saying at the adult level in the assistant seer in the province. And so when I think about work with students and teachers in terms of complicated social, political, religious issues, scaffolding makes the most sense. What the freshmen can experience, what my teachers can experience, what a senior can experience with their parents are very different. And so one size fits all, large messages that do anything other than affirm the church's position tended to be liabilities for us. I can't talk about deep issues of sexuality, of anti-racism, if I'm not in good relationship with that classroom, and I'm not. My teachers are. So how do we empower them to have those conversations in a safe and scaffolded way, as opposed to trying to say, I'm going to make my school's statement on this and hope it just trickles down in the proper way. You end up doing sometimes more harm than good, or you set the conversation back. I don't know if that answers the question. That's just been my own experience. All right, I see another one in here. Woody, did you personally feel some of those same novice sentiments or concerns that you shared earlier? If so, what year as principal did you have a better grasp, understanding of them? Thanks, Woody. I don't have any. I'm making this up as I go along, as most of us are still. So yes, I felt all of the things that the novice principals felt and more. I would say, I don't mind saying this, I shouldn't have been a principal at 32 or 34. I was too young. And people can agree or disagree with that. I was too young. I didn't have enough life experience, administrative experience, even though I was at Loyola High School, I think did some good work there, played a lot of hands, right? Had a lot of issues I worked through, was successful in some way. I think I needed the more life experience and leadership experience to take on this role. So I felt lots of them. That's all I'll say about that. I think probably 6 years in, the pandemic was a big game changer for me. I got to lean on my strengths of, we won COVID, you know, in my image, we won COVID in Sacramento, Jesuit High School did. We worked super hard. We got logistically creative. We problem solved one day after the next, and I was good at that. And that helped me build currency with my faculty, staff, and parents that I'm leaning on now to be a better principal. So yeah, it took quite a few years for me to be more comfortable in this role. And it was hard in those first years. A lot of mistakes, a lot of unnecessary mistakes that I made that I would never hope not to do again.
Mike, I think the title of your dissertation could have been "Living in the Gray." I think that's perhaps the best mantra that we could come up with for describing this role. So I think we could go on and on. I think Hutch's question was a great one. What research comes next? You know, there is so much to talk about, and the irony again is this is a role that so many folks interact with, but we don't often talk about it. And the JSN, the Jesuit schools across North America, do need good people to raise their hand and say, I'm willing to talk about and think about this messy, wonderfully rewarding, wonderfully complex job. So thanks for giving us a snapshot into what it looks like and what it feels like, and not just to sharing your own research, but to sharing your own leadership, which I think is really how we learn best from one another. I would remind everyone on the call and those that are listening to this later after the live session that Dr. Wood's study, his full study, is posted on the inquiry page on the JSN's website. So you can take a look at that, as are so many other studies. But for those who are really wanting more, not only are we interested in hearing from you, but you can take a look at that for more study. So Michael, I would thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thanks for your interest in this conversation. And I think we'll conclude so everyone can get back to the work of schooling. I think you described a position here again that is well beyond academics and discipline and culture wars and you name it. So thank you. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for showing up, folks. Good luck with everything.